China is tightening its grip on Taiwan with the kind of hug you'd get from a python. Slow, methodical, and suffocating. Their relationship has been fraught with tension and hostility. Despite Taiwan's numerous concessions and the retraction of most territorial claims on the Chinese mainland, Beijing still views Taiwan as a rogue province. This simmering conflict has all the makings of a Cold War showdown, with Taiwan standing firm as an independent nation in the eyes of most of the world. But now the tension is reaching boiling point. China has ramped up its military exercises around Taiwan with an aggressive frequency that's impossible to ignore. Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, set up by the US in the 1970s, requires foreign aircraft to announce their presence. While about 20 countries have these zones, they aren't legally binding, and China is taking full advantage of that. China's military drills routinely breach this boundary, flying dangerously close to the island. Taiwan sees these incursions as brazen acts of intimidation and a display of China's military might. Throughout the 2020s, these exercises within Taiwan's ADIZ have become disturbingly frequent, blatantly ignoring Taiwan's sovereignty. On May 23, 2024, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, staged its biggest military exercise near Taiwan yet. The Eastern Theater Command coordinated joint drills with the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Rocket Force, allegedly punishing Taiwan for its separatist actions over the years. Dubbed Joint Sword 2024A, the exercise hinted at more drills to come and raised the chilling possibility of a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, a scenario that could upend the current geopolitical climate. Stay with us as we dive deeper into these provocative maneuvers, uncover the strategic motivations behind them, and explore their dire implications for Taiwan and the broader region in practical terms. In the strictest sense, a quarantine uses law enforcement departments, such as the Coastal Guard that was part of the May military exercise, to limit or otherwise control maritime, sea-based, or airborne traffic to another state or territory. Consider this: the US sent $345 million worth of weapons to Taiwan in July 2023, and similar packages were forthcoming in previous years. Under a quarantine, China would most likely completely prevent future weapons shipments from ever reaching Taiwan. But this isn't China's first show of maritime strength. The military exercise in May wasn't the first time China displayed its maritime capabilities and potential for a quarantine or blockade of Taiwan. Remember when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, visited Taiwan in 2022? China deployed a patrol vessel directly off the coast of Taiwan. The same patrol vessel was called upon in 2023 during then-President Tsai Ing-wen's visit to the US. According to Chinese officials, the Haijun 6, the vessel in question, was supposed to conduct routine inspections on passing vessels, although no such inspections appeared to occur throughout these exercises. This pattern is telling. Instead, the quarantine's limited scope would allow China to determine the exact level of control or screening that it would apply to the island. This would allow China to effectively gain significant ground in forcing Taiwan and the rest of the world to comply with its demands. If China were to successfully implement a limited quarantine without triggering a response from countries allied with Taiwan, particularly the US, and other members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, it could set a new precedent for the normalized relations between China and Taiwan. This would allow Beijing to move slowly forward with its more comprehensive plans, while also giving Chinese law enforcement and military insight into potential risks and weaknesses of subsequent missions. As such, China would slowly start to build a stranglehold around Taiwan. By that point, it's highly likely that Beijing would have enough economic measures in place to direct and influence the Taiwan economy. This would possibly escalate any military response from the US and its allies into a full-blown war that might destabilize the entire region. Due to the nature of quarantine, it's highly unlikely that the US would respond with similar measures against China. Since the US presence in the South and East China Seas is primarily due to its navy, the country doesn't actually have that many coastal patrol vessels at its disposal. It's doubtful that the US would send military ships to perform the same duties as Chinese law enforcement and Coastal Guard patrol ships do, primarily since the perception of using the military vessels in a non-military activity would give China even more leverage. Additionally, the CCG is structured as a semi-militant organization, reporting directly to China's Central Military Commission. Beijing also frequently transfers its naval ships into coastal patrol ships, so some vessels are equipped with state-of-the-art military specs such as 76mm cannons. In contrast, Taiwan's Coast Guard has only 10 ocean-going and 160 other vessels. The island has around 300 ports, so Taiwan trying to protect its ports and match China's patrols while maintaining a presence in the open sea would be a tall order. Therefore, Taiwan would likely depend on the US fleet to artificially increase its fleet size, something that China would try to stop in the first place. Then there's the issue of China having a large militia force. These armed personnel are frequently on board commercial fishing vessels, posing as fishermen. In reality, the militia works closely with both the PLA and the CCG. As a result of the aforementioned economic pressure, the import prices into Taiwan would skyrocket, effectively allowing Beijing to control how much Taiwan can trade. Even if China only feasibly manages to control Kaohsiung, it would still deal a significant blow to Taiwan's economy and international relations. Similar to the first scenario, China would announce new, enhanced customs inspection rules, mandating advance notice with Chinese authorities for shipping goods into Taiwan. However, the second scenario would involve enacting a complete quarantine over the entirety of Taiwan. This would mean that trade to all ports would be subjected to inspections and pressure from China's law enforcement and militia. China would likely appoint a quarter of the CCG to monitor all activity surrounding the island. This would be one of the biggest maritime operations in recent history by China, falling short of an actual naval invasion on the island. In the same way as before, the bulk of the inspections and actual trade pressure would be conducted by law enforcement and militia vessels. The military ships would provide vital recon. While China currently possesses the strategic capability to implement these scenarios, many sources suggest that the most likely timeline for these events would start in 2027. This is likely to coincide with existing upgrades to China's Navy and Air Force, such as building more advanced fighter jets, just in case the strategy unfolds into a military conflict against Taiwan and, more importantly, the US. While China is currently one of the biggest militaries in the world, with some sources suggesting it being in third place behind the US and Russia, the fact is that China's military technology is still decades behind the US. For example, China's air forces are no match for the US Air Force. The newest fighter jet that China has been developing, the Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon, is considered to have the same capabilities as the previous generation American equivalent, such as the F-15, which has been in service since the 1970s. Furthermore, the US has been developing newer generation aircraft of their own, which you can learn more about in some of our other videos. Additionally, the US Marine Corps is currently undergoing significant redesigns as part of the Force Design 2030 initiative. The redesign is meant to transform this part of the US Army into smaller, relatively independent littoral combat units. The Marines will utilize long-range artillery and contemporary reconnaissance technologies to provide vital support for the US Air Force and the Navy. It seems that we only have a few years left before China and the US decide whether to go to war. But what do you think? Is China going to continue its aggressive posturing against Taiwan and implement more offensive measures such as a quarantine or blockade? If so, will the US respond in kind? Let us know what you think in the comments.